you. I'm going to keep my camera off for now. Since it jumps around, I can't figure out how to fix it, but hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for taking time to be here for our May meeting. Desmond, we appreciate your time today as well. Great to have you on. Before we move forward with our speaker, we'll go ahead and review the April minutes. Did everyone receive a copy, and do we have any corrections or updates to those?
Sharon, I move to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Carol.
I'll second that. Very well written.
Thank you, Greg. Kudos to Matthew as always for doing a good job with those.
Well, thank you. So I'll go through the roster and take everybody's vote. Amy Easter, how do you vote?
I'll abstain since I didn't attend last month. Thank you.
Actually, you need to vote, actually.
Oh, well, then I approve. They look fine.
All right.
I just can't speak what was actually spoken about. So thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Amy. Sorry, I'm going to cut my video back off. Since we do have access to the video recording for each of our meetings and we do have the minutes, members are asked to participate and vote. We did have that come up a couple of meetings back and we're able to clarify that.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Michael, how do you vote?
You approve.
I'm sorry. Oh, you did. Okay, thank you. Donna, how do you vote?
Approve.
All right, thank you. Scott, how do you vote?
Approve.
Thank you. Sharon?
Approve.
And Kim?
Approve.
Thank you. Okay.
Great. Thank you all. Okay. So we have with us today, sorry, I'm going to cut it back off. I keep trying. I give up. Scott, nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Hope you're doing well. Desmond, I'll let you introduce yourself. And again, we really appreciate having you with us. We're alternating every other month, having a guest in to speak with us from one of the city departments or another organization that ties in as we learn our roles and how we can tie into the work that you do, and then vice versa, sort of introduce those departments to the committee and share some thoughts and ideas. So thank you for joining us this morning, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Sure, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad that we have a group like this serving the city of Winston-Salem. A little bit about myself. I am the land use coordinator in the Planning and Development Services Department. So my job is more or less to manage the land development entitlement processes. That was a lot of jargon. Basically, that means I help people achieve their land use goals in accordance with the regulations that we have on the books. I am a native of Winston-Salem. I was born and raised here. I went to high school at R.J. Reynolds. I went to college at NC State, and then I went to graduate school at Cornell. Came back home for work in city and regional planning. I've been in the Planning and Development Services Department the whole time that I've worked for the city. I did take a little break from 2016 to 2019 in a different municipality, but I am an avid pedestrian and a new cyclist. I just got a bike during the pandemic and try to use it to commute to and from work every now and then, but I walk almost everywhere I go. So I certainly appreciate the work that you all are doing in this group. So I was asked to speak to you all a little bit about how our work in the Planning and Development Services Department, and specifically the regulations that we kind of oversee and enforce, relate to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So I have got a presentation prepared for you all, and I hope that I do this the right way. Let's see. Are you all able to see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Good.
Most of the time when I make a presentation is via Zoom, so I'm a little nervous about this, but I'm going to talk to you all about linking our development regulations with bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And my slides aren't moving. There we go. So basically, development is regulated or thought about, considered by these four kind of documents that we use in the Planning and Development Services Department and other departments in the city use. And the ones in red here, Legacy 2030 and the Unified Development Ordinances, or the UDO, are the ones that my department are kind of responsible for managing and maintaining. Legacy 2030 is the comprehensive plan for Forsyth County and Winston-Salem. It is a policy document. It's a guide that explicitly states our vision and goals for Forsyth County and Winston-Salem with regard to development and growth management. And then the UDO is a more technical document that is going to realize some of those goals through the rules that it establishes for people wanting to develop land. The other two, the infrastructure design standards and the comprehensive transportation plan, are managed by the engineering division and the Department of Transportation, respectively. The IDS is more technical. So where the UDO might say this type of infrastructure is required, the IDS is going to say this is how that infrastructure must be built. So the IDS contains the technical specs and I got that backwards. Technical specs and standards for whatever infrastructure may be required in the UDO. And then the comprehensive transportation plan is sort of like Legacy, where it kind of talks about overarching vision and goals with regard to transportation infrastructure, but it is specifically focused on transportation. So where Legacy might say, have a more connected community by requiring stub streets to adjacent vacant undeveloped parcels, the CTP might say, we have a plan to extend, these two ends of a street through a certain group of undeveloped parcels. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about any of that so far? All right. I'm going to talk a little more specifically about the first two. So as I said, Legacy 2030 is a comprehensive plan for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. I just picked out some of the goals that are outlined in Legacy that are related to the work that you all are doing. Legacy aims for a more compact and balanced development pattern in the county, a more balanced and sustainable transportation system, and livable neighborhoods. All of those things, that language is very general, but livable neighborhoods in particular, at least from my perspective, is talking about getting people out on pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure so that where their services are kind of easily provided, where they're able to do that, and not having a built environment that's oriented around the automobile. So I have taken some kind of major themes from two of the chapters in Legacy, specifically dealing with land use and transportation. Some of the goals in the land use chapter of Legacy talk about taming the parking beast. We have a lot of parking for most of our land uses in the county. Legacy aims to reduce the amount of required parking. It talks about exploring maximums for parking, because parking and the provision of excess parking is kind of an incentive for auto-oriented development. It talks about containing development to reduce suburban sprawl, so kind of focusing on infill development rather than greenfield development, which is where you basically go and take a wooded, undeveloped parcel, clear it, and develop it with new, more than likely you're developing it with new homes, with new road infrastructure. It talks about reviewing the zoning districts that we have for walkability and bikeability standards. We actually have a few zoning districts with supplemental district requirements, supplemental district standards, and I'll talk about those later, that specifically address pedestrian activity. None of them kind of speak specifically to bikeability yet, but we do have a few that speak specifically to pedestrian scale and form. Another goal is to encourage transit and pedestrian-oriented development and connectivity. I'll talk more about what those standards are in the UDO. So those have actually been kind of codified in some places in our development ordinances. The transportation chapter talked about directing growth to activity centers and growth corridors so that we use our transportation resources efficiently and make walking and cycling viable options. I told you all when I introduced myself, I like to walk almost everywhere I go. So I certainly appreciate, that goal of legacy. It also talks about ensuring development standards to support a mixture, type, density, and design of development that facilitates using transit and other active forms of transportation. So legacy is the guiding document. It sets forth the policy that the county and the city and the other small towns in the county kind of want to enact by way of their development regulations, and ours is the UDO. So I'll talk about the UDO next. These are the development regulations for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. I didn't include it in here, but if you all want to actually see the UDO, you can see it online at udoclearcode.org. So we recently overhauled the UDO. I think that was approved at the beginning of 2020 actually. The UDO clear code came online. It reorganized the UDO, so none of the rules were changed, but it made the UDO easier to navigate. So now you can click through the different chapters of the UDO individually to find a specific provision that you're looking for. And there are embedded kind of hyperlinks in the document itself where it makes reference to other sections of the ordinance. You just click that and it will jump you to that section. So I want to talk about zoning districts, and for anybody who doesn't necessarily know what zoning is, the most basic explanation of zoning is that it determines what land uses are allowed where. We have quite a few zoning districts that determine which uses are appropriate in which locations. The ones that speak specifically to mixed use and pedestrian scale concept are the NB, which is neighborhood business, PB, pedestrian business, CB, central business, and MUS, which is a mixed use district. Those are the 4 districts that kind of specifically call out development standards for pedestrians. Again, there isn't anything in the UDO that specifically advocates for bicycle development standards other than bicycle parking, which you can see further down the page. But these 4 districts in their supplemental district standards specifically talk about urban form, pedestrian scale, parking to the side or rear of buildings, and they all offer some sort of incentive for reducing the amount of parking that's provided. The permitted uses table, or the principal use table, is in chapter 5 of the UDO. The goal of the principal use table is to only allow uses that make sense in the human scale districts that I mentioned previously. Right now, we've got a few that are kind of out of sync. I want to say motor vehicle repair and maintenance is a use that's allowed in the PB district right now. I think that's a carryover from when the UDO was first adopted, and we didn't really have, excuse me, we didn't really have the momentum and kind of energy behind developing in urban centers that we do now, because now that use doesn't really make sense where you want to have pedestrian activity. There are some of the uses that are allowed by the UDO have specific standards that will require them to be developed, at a pedestrian scale or to use a certain form. Some uses are only allowed in certain districts in certain growth management areas. And I didn't talk about growth management areas when I was talking about Legacy. But Legacy organizes the county into 5 different growth management areas. And the first 3 are kind of where we expect the most development to occur. GMA 1 is the urban core, basically. So GMA 1 is going to be downtown and the areas immediately adjacent to that. GMA 2 is urban neighborhood, more dense, kind of smaller lot, residential areas that may be mixed in with more neighborhood commercial, neighborhood scale commercial districts. And then GMA 3, I think, is suburban neighborhoods, which is where we expect the most growth to be occurring. And that has actually borne out. Right now we're experiencing record volumes of development applications. Most of that development is in GMA 3. So the parking standards are what they are. I think we've done a little bit of work on the parking standards since I've been with the department, and I came on with the department shortly after Legacy was updated. I think Legacy was updated in 2012 or 2013. I started in 2013. But one of the amendments to the UDO that has occurred since I've been with the department is a requirement for bicycle parking for most of the uses. Bicycle parking is required for those uses in growth management areas 1, 2, and 3. It's not required in 4 and 5. And that's just because growth management areas 4 and 5 are not considered serviceable areas. And serviceable means they have access to utilities. Access to utilities is kind of how we determine where development is most likely to occur and where it's appropriate to occur. So in GMAs 1, 2, and 3, where we have the infrastructure and the availability of services in place to accommodate a more dense and urban character of development, is where bicycle parking is required. And you're not going to have required bicycle parking for something like warehousing or for something like storage services. I don't think people can carry, the goods they want to store on a bicycle. So where it doesn't make practical sense, bicycle parking is not required, but most uses in the UDO have some bicycle parking standard. The UDO also provides incentives for proximity to transit. So if you're within 750 feet of a transit route, not a transit stop, if you're within 750 feet of the route, you get a reduction in the amount of required parking you have to provide. You get a reduction if you are near sidewalks or greenways. You get a reduction, or you have the ability to get credit for on-street parking where that's available. And some of that is determined in partnership with the Department of Transportation, where on-street parking is actually available versus where people just decide to park on the street. And then certain zoning districts, those 4 districts that I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, those offer the biggest incentive for reduced parking. You get a 30% reduction in the NB, PB, and MUS districts. The CB district does not require parking at all. And then I wanted to devote its own slide. I wanted to devote one slide to infrastructure specifically. because I figured that you all would be interested in knowing what the UDO says has to be provided as it pertains to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Unfortunately, there isn't much in the UDO that requires bicycle infrastructure other than the parking requirements. However, where some roadway improvements can be required, those usually involve road widening, and the widening is intended to accommodate bike lanes or shared lanes where bicycles have access. So sidewalks generally in the UDO are required on both sides of streets classified as thoroughfares, and that classification comes from the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. And you've got major thoroughfares, minor thoroughfares, boulevards. All of those will require sidewalks on both sides for new development. And then on one side of collector streets. The UDO also requires pedestrian connections to be made from sidewalk designated streets to the primary entrance of a commercial development. So if you are building a doctor's office, or you're building a vet clinic, or you're building a restaurant, and your building, your development fronts on a street where a sidewalk is required, so it's a thoroughfare or a collector, or it's just designated for sidewalk by the CTP, you have to provide a pedestrian connection from that street to the primary entrance of your development. Whenever a new subdivision is built, sidewalks are required on one side of all internal streets. Curb and gutter go along with that sidewalk in certain growth management areas, so they're not required everywhere. Like GMA 5 is our rural growth management area. There aren't a lot of sidewalks. There's not a lot of curb and gutter out there. So curb and gutter and sidewalks might not be required in GMA 5 unless there's a new subdivision. Existing right-of-way improvements. So those are, and this may be worded strangely, what I'm trying to say is improvements in existing right-of-way or existing rights-of-way can be required for new developments when those new developments require review and or approval by the planning board or an elected body. So Petersburg Parkway, for instance, is kind of a nightmare for pedestrians and cyclists. It's a giant road, but let's say somebody found a vacant parcel or they wanted to redevelop an existing parcel and there was no pedestrian infrastructure. There was no sidewalk in front of that parcel. If they wanted to go before the planning board or the city council for a special use district zoning, which has a specific site plan for the development, or they wanted to ask the planning board for a use that requires their approval, the board can require them to install the sidewalk, because Petersburg Parkway is a thoroughfare, along their entire property frontage and all the infrastructure that goes along with that. So God forbid, but if something called for Petersburg Parkway to be widened to accommodate bicycle infrastructure, that could also be required during that review and approval process. It's a good thing, but it is also kind of limiting, right? Because we can only require those things where the review by the planning board and the city council or the board of commissioners is required. So if somebody has the zoning in place to develop the property the way they want to develop it, and they don't have to go in front of the planning board or the elected body for permission to develop it that way, our hands are tied. We can't require them to do any of that stuff. Even if the CTP says there are going to be sidewalks and bike lanes on this road, we can't require any of that infrastructure with that development because they have the right to do it as is. The same thing goes for what's called a minor subdivision, and those are subdivisions that where all the lots have frontage on existing streets. They're not building new streets. No review by the planning board is required. Even if those lots are being created on a street that the CTP says should have sidewalks and bike lanes, we can't require those things at the staff level. So those are some of the limitations that we have with the UDO currently. Greenway easements are usually obtained when new development, again, that requires planning board or elected body review, is proposed along designated routes. We have a person on our staff who is dedicated to kind of monitoring where new development occurs and whether that development is along a proposed greenway route. We will acquire the easement during that process, but we do not require construction of the greenway where we acquire that easement. Right now, the process is only that we get the easement, and then the city and the county will work together to construct the greenway down the road. So when it comes to changing the UDO, there's a very strict process that involves two public hearings, at least two public hearings. So regardless of whether you're one of these three types, the process is such that the proposal goes before the City County Planning Board for a public hearing. Anybody can make comment with regard to whether the proposed amendment is appropriate. The planning board will vote and make its recommendation to the appropriate elected body. Usually with text amendments, they're going to the city council and the county board of commissioners. We try to be consistent with our development regulations unless, you know, it's inappropriate. So we recently had a proposed text amendment dealing with turkey shoots. Turkey shoots are only allowed in the county because you can't fire a weapon in the city limits. So that one only went to the board of commissioners. Anyway, public hearing, recommendation by the city county planning board, and then it'll go for another public hearing before each of those elected bodies. There are three ways to change the UDO. The first is the citizen initiated change or a citizen proposed change. That requires a person or a group of people to submit an application to our department, providing an explanation or a justification for why they think the ordinance needs to change. They'll pay a fee. We as staff will analyze their request or their proposal for, you know, consistency with the comprehensive plan, consistency with the comprehensive transportation plan, the goals of legacy, those sorts of things. And then we will make a recommendation to the planning board and present that to them at the public hearing. And then the process works the way I described it before. They'll have a public hearing, they'll vote and make a recommendation, and then it'll go to the elected officials. The second way that you can do this is a staff initiated text amendment. And most text amendments, most recent text amendments have been staff initiated. They're based on the comprehensive plan and the planning board work program. And the planning board work program is basically things that come from the comprehensive plan. So if staff proposes a text amendment, it is because legacy recommended it or the state general statutes have changed and we've got to update our ordinance to be in compliance with the general statutes. When staff initiates a text amendment, there is an interdepartmental review and analysis of the proposed amendment to make sure that the different departments that may be impacted by the to give feedback and make whatever adjustments they may need to make in association with that change. And then the last way a text amendment can be enacted or started is by the elected officials themselves. And that may be based on their strategic plan or something that they've been hearing a lot about from their constituents. We recently did a text amendment that was at the direction of the city council with regard to the city's sign ordinance. So we were instructed to provide the council with some information. Upon receiving that information, they decided to instruct staff to change the ordinance based on the information that we had given them. And that's usually how that goes. They'll tell us, do some research. I'm hearing a lot about this thing. and we'll present our report to them, and then they will tell us, yeah, go ahead and pursue this, or it doesn't seem like it's an issue. That also involves the interdepartmental input and analysis, just so we can make sure that all the departments are on the same page and everybody knows what's going to happen when the amendment goes through. And I just wanted to highlight some other ways that staff provides input to the UDO or to development in general as it pertains to infrastructure for bicycles and pedestrians. So interdepartmental review of development whenever that's required. WisDOT staff, and Matthew's a part of the team that kind of gets together and gives feedback with regard to the development. They have an opportunity to say, you know, this is a sidewalk designated corridor, we're going to require curb, gutter, and sidewalk, or this is designated as a bicycle route, we're going to ask for, you know, X, Y, and Z. Commercial building evaluations are a service that our department provides for people who are interested in redeveloping properties. We have sometimes had the opportunity to use the commercial building evaluation as a way to encourage people to develop their properties in a more pedestrian-friendly way. The building evaluations don't really allow us to require anything, but we can use that as a platform to encourage people to be smart about the way they develop. Rezoning petitions, I kind of mentioned that before. This is an opportunity where we have a lot of sway as it pertains to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, but only when somebody is proposing a rezoning with a site plan. So if they're proposing to change the zoning from one general use district to another general use district, we don't get to say install sidewalks or curb and gutter or widen the road for bicycles. But usually when something comes through, or always when something comes through with a site-specific plan for development, we have the opportunity to say, do these things. I've got traffic impact analyses on here. Usually a TIA will come with recommendations to accommodate additional traffic that is going to be produced or that's expected to be produced by new development. Those recommendations can include pedestrian infrastructure improvements. I don't think I've ever seen one that talks about bicycle infrastructure improvements, but they can include pedestrian infrastructure improvements. And in the area plans that we've done small area plans for every area of the county. I think recently we've been doing growth corridor and strategic area plans. All of those area plan processes are public, so the citizens have an opportunity to give their input and say, we want this to be more pedestrian oriented. We want people to have opportunities to use alternative modes of transportation going up and down these growth corridors, and we want development to accommodate those things or make them easier for people to do when it comes through on those growth corridors. That, I think, is all I have to share with you all, so I am glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Desmond.
Desmond, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for all this information that you've shared. It's a lot to digest in a very short period of time. I think my first question would be, could we have a copy of your presentation? I wanted to focus on that more than trying to take notes, because sometimes I get lost when I'm taking notes. But I think one of the questions I might have would be, as a committee focused on bicycling, pedestrian, and active mobility, I think you pointed it out, but I'm not sure. Maybe if we were to concentrate and focus in on some things that maybe we could analyze or digest a little bit deeper to help make recommendations in the future, would it be the zoning districts, NB, PB, CB, MUS, or what would you recommend that our focus be placed on?
I think I think the districts and their supplemental standards are pretty well developed as it pertains to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So where you all might want to focus your recommendations would be on new development and redevelopment, maybe strengthening what the planning board or the staff can require or ask of developers when they are developing property. I think I mentioned we can ask for stuff and we can require stuff when it has to go to the planning board and the elected body, but we can ask, but we can't require anything if it doesn't. So maybe looking at areas to strengthen the ability of the city and the county to require that infrastructure where, the plans say it's appropriate.
I think another question I might have would be the 2030 legacy plan. When was that created, and is it coming up for renewal or review again? Because I know it's only 2022, but we're fast approaching 2030 now.
Yes. So legacy itself was adopted sometime when I was still in high school, I think.
Oh my gosh.
And it was updated in 2012 or 2013 to Legacy 2030. That's actually the update to the original Legacy plan. Legacy, or the comprehensive plan, is actually about to be updated. I'm glad you asked the question, because now I get to put in a plug and tell my boss I got to do it. The new comprehensive plan is going to be called Forward 2045. We are in the process of kind of briefing the planning board on our strategies for outreach and what the plan is going to say and all that stuff, or what we are looking for the plan to include. So that is going to happen very soon, and you all will have an opportunity to participate in the development process for that document, as well as the public hearings when it's finally ready to go before the planning board and the elected bodies.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
I was going to piggyback on that question, Carol, on enacting change or perhaps making some recommendations on those new development and redevelopment. Would that be something that would be part of that Forward 2045 plan, or would that be something that we might start considering and putting some thought to now, or both?
Yeah, I think both are certainly appropriate. Forward 2045 is going to be the guiding document for development and growth moving forward. It won't establish the actual rules for growth and development. It'll just say this is where we want to go, and then it'll be on us and the elected officials to implement those goals. I would say, if you think, and I realize that the bicycle and pedestrian plan was recently adopted, if you think that there's stuff out there that needs to be addressed, and it doesn't matter, what a comprehensive planning document might say, you should go ahead and try to press for those changes. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Desmond. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for walking and biking and being active. That's great to hear our staff is part of that movement or has that experience. So one question I had is, what is your understanding of how our UDO compares to neighboring municipalities, say like Wake County or even just like Greensboro, Guilford County? Did they include more bike ped mentions and guidance, or is this kind of run of the mill for our area?
I don't have a ton of experience looking specifically at those things, but I did work in Cary between 2016 and 2019. Their development standards don't, and I think this is pretty common throughout the state. There is no specific mention of bicycle infrastructure in the development regulations, but there's lots of mention of pedestrian infrastructure. Sidewalks are required. I think every development ordinance is going to where and when sidewalks are required. Whether they require, sidewalks in every instance or on both sides, it's going to vary depending on when their ordinances were adopted. Generally speaking, though, ours are pretty, from what I have seen, they're pretty in line with our contemporaries, which is good in some instances and not so great in others. But just a specific example, we have a development option called a planned residential development. And it basically allows people to take advantage of environmentally constrained properties by building the density that the overall acreage would allow them to have, but with smaller lots, with houses that are closer together. But our ordinance only requires sidewalks on one side of all internal streets. Well, when you have houses that close together and you're required to provide, active open space, so spaces where people can benefit from the amenities that the community provides, they're supposed to be connected to one another. Having sidewalks on both sides of the street makes more sense, or it could make more sense. But that's not anything that the PRD standards specifically address. So there are some shortcomings where I think other communities may have gotten ahead of that already. But we are pretty close to our peers.
And just as a follow-up, are you aware of any, all across the country, all across the world, anybody who's got a really good kind of shining star UDO, either individually or holistically as a community, that we could look at to kind of brainstorm and set our sights high, so to speak?
Not right now, but I will be glad to look into that and get back with you all.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to make recommendations for changes, going back to Sharon's last question, would that come from citizen initiative, or would we run that through staff since we're a department or a committee of the city?
Yeah, my understanding is that this is a committee of appointed citizens. You all were appointed by elected officials, is that right? So I would think that this board serves in an advisory capacity, and therefore, whenever you brought recommendations to a committee of the council or to the council as a whole, that would be a staff initiated or council initiated text amendment rather than a citizen initiated one.
Okay.
That would be my understanding.
Okay, I just wondered because I saw that fee attached to citizen initiatives.
Well, yeah, if it came from you all, there wouldn't be a fee attached.
Okay.
Other questions?
Desmond, this is Greg Garrett. Good to see you, buddy. I wanted to ask about greenways and the provision of rights of way or easements through the development process for future greenways or planned greenways. What can you enlighten us with on that?
Sure. We most commonly will obtain a greenway easement through a residential development proposal. So when somebody does special use zoning for a P UD, a planned unit development, or somebody goes to the planning board for a new subdivision, and it's along usually a creek where a greenway is proposed in the Greenway plan, we will just say provide a 40-foot greenway easement on both sides of the bank or on both sides of the creek from the top of bank, because we don't know which side of the creek the greenway is actually going to be on. So we'll just get it at that point. They dedicate it, they show it on their site plan, and then we have a condition of approval that they actually record the dedication of that easement with their plat before they can get any building permits. Did that answer your question?
Does it require an adopted plan of the Greenway plan to be able to enforce a particular segment to be dedicated or reserved for rights of way? Does it, you have to have a segment or a path planned and already approved by local officials before you can do that?
Yes, we won't ask for an easement unless there's something in the Greenway plan that says there's a planned route following this stream or following this this path. It hasn't been my experience that we say, oh, this would be good for some sort of trail. Now, we have said to developers who may be adjacent to a greenway or a proposed or planned greenway, but are not directly touching it or it's not on their property, we have said you should probably dedicate an easement to connect to this greenway in the future when it's built. But in those circumstances, we can't require it either because it's just not on the plan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that Wake County and City of Cary do include in any development that they have to create and provide greenway access from that development. Other questions for Desmond? Anyone? This was great information. It's nice to meet you.
Yes.
I apologize that my video is not cooperating, but we
That
appreciate
is
your
no
time.
problem. I realized I didn't put my contact information on any of the slides. So if you all have any other questions that you think of later, or you see something just going throughout the community and you are thinking, I wonder what Desmond would say about that, I will give you my information right now. You can call me at 336-747-7065. And my email address is Desmond C. That's DESMONDC at cityofws.org. And I communicate with Matthew all the time. So if you weren't able to get that, he can get it for you.
That's great. Thank you again.
Sure.
Thank you for your work and like you're speaking our love language. It's so great to have you here.
Yep, agree.
All right. You all have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond.
Thanks.
It's really good information. Thanks
Very
for
good.
that suggestion and connection, Matthew.
Happy to do that. Yeah, that's a good, certainly a major impact on biking and walking infrastructure. So
Yeah, it is. We have just 10 minutes left, and I think the next thing on the agenda was the micromobility update. And then I think we can hold the bike shop conversations till June. We'll be talking about communications again. Calendar updates for Bike Month. We shared the link for those and shared those dates before, so I'll trust that people can find those on their own. Matthew, I'm really glad the micromobility update is on here. This is something that we've touched on a couple of times. We haven't really dug into deeply. And just recently, I rode with a friend who had some very heated and strong opinions about the scooters. And in trying to respond to those, it wasn't about, people use the scooters, which we see a lot of that, just scooters in general, and sort of a judgment around those. But the feedback from this individual was that they had had some negative experiences trying to report abandoned scooters and that kind of thing with spin specifically. And being the personality that this individual is, they had actually read the ordinance and saw some places that maybe the ordinance does not match up with current real life situations. So, I'm a fan of any ways that we can get people active, get people out in the community, utilizing micromobility options, whatever those may be. But I felt very sort of disarmed in that moment. Like I didn't really know how to respond other than, oh. So anything you can share with us to better equip us to answer those questions or explain the spin relationship would be great.
Sure. So I think as it relates to addressing any issues, Spin has put their 800 number, customer service number, on all the scooters. So if people see a scooter out there that's it's illegally parked, they can report that. If they should get a response. The ordinance requires a response to that request within 2 hours. If you don't get that response, contact CityLink, contact me, and we can follow up with Spin and hold them to that. Now, from my experience, when I report an issue, they're usually pretty prompt with that. But that's a reactive response. So we don't want the responsibility to be on people to report that. So what we've asked them to do is have proactive patrols, basically, especially in the downtown area where it's probably the biggest issue. To have, if there is a scooter blocking pedestrian access, that's a major issue downtown. So we've asked them to basically, proactively patrol the streets and the sidewalks to pick up any offending devices that are out there. So they're doing that. We also may not help with the parking issue, but some of the other requirements in the ordinance that people not ride on greenways, or that they not go ride or park in the old Salem Historic District, or through the transit center. We use the GPS technology to track that and to prohibit rides in those areas. So the companies actually set up geofences, and when those devices enter those areas, they can slow them down, notify the user, and then stop the device. So I think we want to be proactive with it. So using the technology and having Spin take the initiative, or whatever company is operating, have them take the initiative to do those proactive patrols. I think that's when we want to solve. We don't want there to be a problem. We want to address that before it becomes a problem. If it does become a problem, then hopefully through the app or through email or through phone calls, the public can report those issues. And if they're not getting a response, then that's when we can certainly, as staff, get involved and follow up with them and make sure they're addressing the issues.
Thank you. And just overall, in the changes that were made this year and sort of the relaunch of Spin, I'm certainly seeing them more often. Though I feel like I'm not seeing them as much as last year. Are you pleased with the changes? Are you seeing some positive input and ridership data and that sort of thing?
So I will send, I have some ridership information, some maps, some charts that show kind of the comparison of this year to last year, and where those rides are most happening most frequently. And you're right. Your observation is correct that the rides this year are down about 40%. It looks like, compared to March and April of 2021, ridership is definitely down this year in comparison.
That's significant.
So, yeah. The other statistics, the distances that people are riding, the trip duration, that's still in line. It's just that there have been fewer rides in the community this year. So we're kind of getting into the peak season now for ridership. So we'll see if that rebounds or if it continues to kind of lag behind what it was in 2021. But I'd be happy to send out, I can share my screen here, but I think it might be, I know we're running short on time. I'll send these slides out to the group and give you some time to look them over.
Sure. Michael, do you know if that compares at all to the flow bikes? Are you seeing a similar drop this year compared to last year, or do you know off the top of your head? Or I think you're on mute.
You not hear me?
Yep.
I think things have increased. I haven't looked at the direct data in the last several weeks or anything, but yeah, I mean, we're at least at the same level, if not increased, on the bike usage.
Okay. Thanks.
And Sharon, I would say, as it relates to the ordinance, this committee is in, the ideal position to review that ordinance and make recommendations as to changes. So that I think that would be a good activity for this group to pursue if you all are interested in that.
Thank you. That's a good reminder as well.
Yeah, that ordinance was drafted in 2019, and we have not changed anything in it since then. So if there are updates that are needed or clarifications that are needed, I think it's certainly time to do that.
Okay. Okay, in the couple of minutes that we have left, any other questions, reminders, quick announcements from the group?
I just would like to know what planned activities are scheduled for May for Bike Month, and how I can participate and volunteer.
Yeah, and Greg, you've reminded me, I've fallen off the wagon to cross-check you with the emails and announcements. So if you're not getting anything, let me know. Amy has a calendar update, and I think you just sent an email out from Cycling Advocacy yesterday or today.
Yeah, it was late yesterday. There was an email, so if people are on that distribution, they got it. But I also put a link in the chat to the site where we've got some of the Winston Can sponsored events, and then a community calendar which has everything that we're aware of happening kind of in the area. So that'd be a good place to look and see things that you might want to participate in, or some of them do have volunteer opportunities. I know for sure the Bike More activity in Ardmore scheduled for this Saturday. Hopefully it doesn't rain. They do need volunteers, and so the link on that calendar has a link for the volunteer opportunity there too.
Is that a rain or shine event, or will it be rescheduled?
It will not be rescheduled.
Okay.
It just might not happen. I don't think they, I don't know what they're going to do. There's more calls, I think, scheduled to kind of figure it out, because the weather's not looking great, but maybe we'll get lucky and it'll still be able to happen. But no, it's a one and done, because they had to do a street closure and some other stuff. So.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have the Rite of Silence happens on the 18th. Greg, I'll send that link out as well, so that everyone has it at the top of their email, just in case. Anything else?
Thank you, Sharon.
Sure. Yeah, I thought Desmond's conversation and information was really helpful. And hope you all have safe and healthy rest of the month. Our next meeting will be on June 8th, and we'll dive back into sort of capturing some of these conversations that we've been having over the past couple of months, get back into that communication planning and look at the rest of the year and discuss our speaker option for July. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.